Hello and welcome to Taylor Talks Comics. We have a special guest here today, Chris Stevens of Lighthouse Comics, talking about a special project that they will be launching on Kickstarter that will be showcasing the wonderful Steve Bissette's beautiful artwork in his project called Tyrant that he did in the 90s. So Chris, thank you for joining me. How are you doing today?
Hey, Taylor, thanks for having me, man. I'm thrilled to be here to talk with you about Stephen R. Bissette's Tyrant. And yeah, good morning. It's great to talk with you.
Definitely. So we have the project launching in a little bit. You're going to announce the date later, but I will have a link down below in the description that has a notify me of launch. So if you are curious about Tyrant, which you all should be, because it's going to be a beautiful, beautiful, two different books. We're going to talk about that too. There's going to be two different books. You want to make sure to click on that link and have it notify you, send you an email whenever the campaign launches so you don't miss out on it. But Chris, how did you come upon doing this? How are you the publisher of this awesome project?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a story that goes back a little bit about I believe it wound up coming out in 2015. I published a book called Little Nemo, Dream Another Dream. That was a very well-received book that the basic gist of was there were over 100 creators from today, meaning 10 years ago, but create active creators we commissioned to pay tribute to Winsor McCay's celebrated Little Nemo in Slumberland comic strip from I think it ran from 1905 to 1921 in a couple different iterations. I'm probably screwing up the dates and losing my expert status on it, but
it's definitely that time period though, for sure.
It was very early 1900s. Yeah, and it ran for about 15 years in two different runs, and it was widely celebrated as perhaps the most beautifully drawn comic strip, and certainly among the greatest of all comic strips. And McCay considered one of the great draftsmen of all time and one of the great innovators of the the comic panel form, let's call it. So that book I put out through my old company called Locust Moon, and Steve was one of the artists who contributed a page to that book. And the connection is even further where Jim Rugg also contributed a page to that book, and Jim designed the Little Nemo book, for which he won an Eisner and Harvey, and I think a bunch of different awards we won, and certainly for the design was part of that whole award season for Little Nemo. And at some point, Jim said to me, pretty early in the thing, he said he might even have been at the store, or maybe it was just on the phone, because Jim would visit the Locust Moon store in Philadelphia. And it was either at the store in person or on the phone. But he said to me, hey, do you know Steve Bissette did a Tyrant like in Slumberland page, and it has nothing to do with this, but he just did one already? They said, no, I didn't know that. He said, do you like Steve Bissette? Would you want to get in touch with him? Would you be interested? And I said this the other day, like, little did Jim know, because it hadn't come up. Steve is one of the guys. I've been like deep into comics since I was probably 8 years old. And in all seriousness, I think I started taking it serious, meaning like in my little boy's mind, like actively thinking about it a lot and trying to figure out, why is this comic better than this one? Or why does this one affect me differently than this one? Or why, when I read this one, do I feel like I'm in the book? And when I read this one, I don't. Like, I started, it's just something that sort of struck me at a young age. And I am the right age, pretty much exactly, to have been a little boy, super impressionable in even before your formative years. I was 8 years old when Steve's Swamp Thing with Alan Moore started coming out, and there was a tiny little shop, as the direct market would have been sort of blooming at that time in the early mid 80s. There was a time I lived in a tiny town, like 8,000 people, but there was a little shop that was like literally catty cornered in the whole, in the side of a building, and they sold baseball cards and comics, and the guy sat like an owl behind the counter smoking cigars, and there were no lights on in the place. It was like one of those old school things. But the Swamp Thing, it was the summer of Swamp Thing, and if you bought a DC comic, every DC comic had a house ad where it was an image that, you know, Steve had drawn of Swamp Thing sort of coming out of the side of a panel, and it said the anatomy lesson, and you just couldn't avoid it. And, you know, that was 8 years old, and by 10, I think I finally got a copy of it and read it. And so Stephen R. Bissette, the name was just so powerful to me from 10. And then, you know, you get to like post high school years, which for me is the mid 90s, and you don't know what the hell you're doing with yourself. If you were someone like me, at least I didn't go off to college or anything. I actually dropped out of high school and then was like, what the hell am I going to do? And around that time, it's an era of you know, some works that were very foundational for me, like in particular Paul Pope's THB.
Ooh.
And then you know, David Mack's Kabuki.
Oh yeah.
In some ways, Jeff Smith's Bone, it wasn't quite the same thing, but to see that sort of work was so refreshing. I loved Rob Liefeld and all that shit, just like anybody else. I'm not one of these people who like looks down my nose at the crazy era of, you know, you know, that era of like extreme or whatever. But it was refreshing at 18 or 19 or whatever to see the Jeff Smith stuff. And, you know, I just knew in my mind, even if I didn't quite understand the history, and, you know, I didn't know much about Walt Kelly at that point, probably. So to truly understand what Smith was sort of invoking. But, you know, that stuff. And then Steve's Tyrant, when Tyrant originally comes out, it's that period too. But the difference was, with all due, and I'm working with Paul now, and I revere Jeff Smith, so it's not about like, I'm not putting those works down, but there's a huge difference in Mack with Kabuki, Paul with what he was doing, Smith with Bone. Even though Smith's older than Mack and Pope, they were all sort of getting started with those works when they did them. Whereas Steve, when I saw Tyrant, it was, to me, oh my God, that's the guy who helped push comics forward when I was a little kid, and now he's doing, you know, like this work of a grown man, like he's doing this personal, you know. And Tyrant was bizarre back then. It's something that won't hit people that way today, and that's a beautiful thing. That shows the progress we've made as a medium, and what the audience expects, and raise their expectations beyond just kid stuff. But Tyrant was, I'm guessing I'm a little bit older than you. I'm 51. So like in the mid 90s, I'm, you know, end of my teenage years, let's say. And man, Tyrant was like bizarre. You know, there wasn't, there weren't Tyrants. It wasn't that there weren't great independent works. I mean, Love and Rockets had been going on forever, and Clowes had been going on, you know, guys like Dan Clowes had been around forever. And obviously there was stuff like that, but we're talking about a work set in what seems to be a genre field of, you know, dinosaurs, but there are no characters in the sense of humans, and there's no science fiction elements, right? There's no time travel, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Lost World elements. It's literally meant to be, here's the life story of this dinosaur to the best of my ability and the science of you know, the science of the era. So Tyrant was bizarre, but that bizarreness hit people like me and Jim, you know, in the right places, you know. And Jim's talked about it. It was a different effect for Jim, because Jim being able to write and draw, and Jim having, you know, the graphic skills he has, Jim's sort of a full package. And the way I think of it, as someone who can only write and you know, do a bit of art direction, and, you know, hopefully think that I know what I'm looking at, right? Jim sort of has, you know, Jim saw it, and it was like a career guide. It was almost like he understood who Steve was too. Jim's a few years younger, but he already, you know, he already understood who Steve was too by the time he was 14, 15. So Jim's buying Tyrant. Tyrant for me is maybe the year after high school, and for Jim's buying Tyrant off the rack when he's in high school still, you know. And he's talked about how he read the back matter and realized Steve's publishing himself, and Steve in the back matter is talking about working with the printer and all this stuff. And Jim realized, like, this is what a cartoonist does. I don't have to work for Marvel or DC, as cool as that might be. And, you know, and obviously he's done stuff like the Hulk, right? But it was, he, I think, saw a career path, whereas for me it was very inspirational, I guess, in a historical way, of like, you know, a guy in his late teens, early 20s with like idealistic thoughts. And in my mind, it was like, very much the great creator Stephen Bissette has struck out on his own, and this is what a man does, you know, like that sort of thing. So really, yeah, it was the Little Nemo book that was the original connection of Steve, Jim, and me. And that book came out in 2015, and then around 2019 I got hired. I started doing freelance editing in around 2019, and in particular with a project called The Golem of Venice Beach. And on that project, the creator Hanan Beiser had sort of tasked me with, he was just getting into comics. It was his first book, and he didn't want to spend it. He wasn't looking, he wanted to make a splash, and he was in the position to do so. And he had great taste, and he knew he'd read a lot of comics, and he wanted to get certain creators, or to get, like, you know, big creators. And I thought of Steve right away when I read the scripts and saw that there might be, you know, there wasn't really even anything in the script for him. But I said to Hanan, like, hey, Steve Bissette, I think, you know, would be perfect for what you're trying to do here. And let's see if we could get him involved. And Steve wasn't doing a lot of comics pages, right? You know, he hadn't done many. And he said no at first. And then I think he said no twice, but he wound up saying yes. And so that kept us connected. He did the Golem pages. It went well for everybody. You know, what Steve expected happened, and we were, you know, thrilled with the results. And so that kept us connected. So probably about a year into that, maybe 2021 or something, I start thinking like, man, you know, doing this freelance editing, and I'm sort of getting I'd had some down years, you know, just sort of in the wilderness type years. Yeah, just lost years. I was living in the Bronx. My wife's a doctor, and she was doing her residency in the Bronx. And I just, you know, I used to be a very heavy drinker, and when we lost the Locust Moon store and the company and everything in 2016, and, you know, I wound up having health problems. You know, it's just a whole whirlpool of shit.
Yeah.
And the Golem helped sort of bring me out of that. And I got real heavy into freelance editing. I've done a million things, and, you know, some of it hasn't come out yet, and, you know, some of it dies on the vine. But I don't even know. I got to look at the amount of pages, but you know, it's got to be 1,000 pages in the last 5 years or something like that. It's a lot of stuff, more than that probably. But through the course of it, I did start to think. I started to get those feelings of putting books together myself and not doing it for other people. You know.
Yeah.
So then maybe about 3 years ago, you know, I would chat with Steve on Facebook here and there, and it was fairly casual, but, you know, just, you know, hi, how are you, whatever it was. But I did reach out and say, hey, Steve, like, I think I'm going to, you know, do well with this freelance editing stuff I'm doing. And, you know, I've sort of got my life together, and I'm really focused on this stuff, and I want to make up for lost time. And one of the things I'd really like to do is Tyrant. What do you think? And he said, Chris, thanks, but no. And it was pretty no. It was okay. So a few months later, hey, Steve, how are you? I keep thinking about Tyrant. You know, I know you said no, but what do you think? Chris, thank you, Chris. It's flattering, but that's something, you know, that's an old work. It's, you know, nobody wants to see it. I said, okay, all right. And then some months go by, and I reach out and I say, hey, Steve, what do you think? And I think it was 3 times. And it was like, Chris, you know, I love you. Thank you. But it's not something that's going to happen. And I said, all right, okay. Now, I wasn't ready to give up, but, you know, 3 times, it's kind of like, all right. And then not long after that, Steve messages me and says, Chris, have you ever seen this Kayfabe video? And I said, and I didn't, because I told you I wasn't really, when we were talking backstage, Taylor, I told you I didn't know the comics YouTube world really. I'm friends with Jim, but I hadn't really seen Kayfabe episodes, as bad as that sounds. I just, something that wasn't on my, you know, I wasn't seeing that stuff.
Yeah.
So I had a vague notion, you know, and I went and looked, and I saw that cartoonist Kayfabe had done the Tyrant video that people know of now. And I won't lie, I thought to myself, fuck yes. I thought, thank God, right? And then Steve was just like, hey, maybe you're right, Chris, you know, like, maybe you're right. Maybe people do want to see this, you know? And I said, Steve, I'm so happy that you saw that video and that they made it. And, you know, Jim and Ed are so tapped into this world. You know what I mean? Like, they're so tapped into this world. And if they feel that strongly about it, Steve, I'm glad you recognize what they're trying to say, you know? So that answers your question, I think, about, you know, is kind of accurately as I can. That was sort of the thing of it. And if there's any moral in there for anybody out there, you know, yeah, there's a limit, right? You don't want to be you got to feel these things out, and you got to sort of play it by your instincts, but don't give up the first time somebody tells you no, I guess would be my, I've worked with some of my favorite people, and some of the greatest artists in comics have told me no for various projects. I've worked with Yuko Shimizu on several things, and every time she says, "No, Chris, I don't do that. No, Chris, I don't do comics." And I said, "Well, it's not really comics. Let's just try to, you know what I mean?" So yeah, just don't take no. If you got something you believe in, and I believed in Tyrant with all my heart, all my heart. I think it's one of the true masterworks of the medium. I think Steve at the time possessed a combination of just heightened abilities that few people have ever had in a concentrated period of producing the 80 to, I'm spacing on the exact number, 86 Tyrant story pages, let's say. The symbiotic, it's working on such a level of all the line art gets all the attention, and we're hoping even more so because people see what we're doing with it and the reproduction that we're going to be able to get. Thanks to Sean Michael Robinson, who is the publisher of Living the Line Comics, which is a great publisher. And Sean is also sort of widely acknowledged as the sort of leading expert on line art reproduction. So very early on, I was only really ever planning on doing it with Jim. I hadn't really talked about it with Jim, but when Steve said yes, I right away, I texted Jim and I said, "Hey," I said, "I should call you. Like, I think Steve is going to say yes to this, and I want it to be me and you." And as soon as Jim said yes, pretty much right away. And then one of the first things Jim said was Sean Michael Robinson. Like, do you know him? Do you want to get him involved? And I had talked with Sean when I made a book in an editorial capacity called Axe Wielder John with Nick Patara. Yeah, a couple years ago, and that was a great experience. And I forget exactly what the confluence of events was where Sean and me and Nick had talked, but I wound up on the phone with Sean a couple times and enjoyed talking with him. So yeah, I knew who Jim was talking about, and Sean's come in and he's done I think his actual credit in the book is going to be production wizardry. And I'm not a super serious, I'm not a super buttoned up guy or anything, but it gave me pause whereas I'm, writing out the credits to send to Jim to do his part with the design and everything. And I said to both of them, I said, "Guys, I said, we're calling it, the wizardry thing is fun." I said, "You sure you want that in the book?" And I think they do. I think that's what it's going to be. So
that's awesome.
Our production wizard, Sean Michael Robinson, but the reason I bring this up is, yes, the line art, Taylor, and Steve's his brushwork, his pen and ink work, all that gets the most of the attention. And we're dealing with a black and white book, so it's right there in your face. Mm-hmm. But when you read it, the thing that I loved the art when I was 19, and I love the art now, but it wasn't the art really that did it for me when I became enthralled with the book 30 years ago, or now as I'm getting lucky to be in the position to bring the book back to life, so to speak. It was the combination of what I was saying a minute ago. He is so in control and at a heightened level of every element of a comic book page, from the scripting to the lettering. I mean, the placements, the lettering placements, which is a weird thing to get, rhapsodic about, but the lettering placements there's bits of genius. There's bits of genius in just simple things where he'll place a word that's outside of the entire boundary of the page. And it's like, you're not supposed to do that. And and you're like, oh, he fucked that up. That's not the way that should be. And then you step back and go, wait a minute, that's genius. It's perfect. It's so much more immersive. So he's just completely in control of those things. In a way, I don't think he's, I don't think he ever was in control of those things again at that level. And if Steve was here, I think he might even acknowledge that. So I said it with some hesitation, just because I love Steve and I don't want to sound like I'm saying anything that's denigrating. But I think it was him at his highest level, just like an athlete. At one point, Michael Jordan was at his best, right? And then he wasn't, you know what I mean? So that's all I mean by that, is I think Steve was truly at the height of his prime in the Tyrant issues, in that couple years where he made those issues. And it's just a joy. We're starting to get deep into the production of the design, and you mentioned earlier we're going to have 2 editions in the Kickstarter, one called the original art edition, which I'm sure your audience is largely familiar with. The
Yeah.
God bless Scott Dunbier for creating this form in the artist edition format, which reproduces artwork at a 1-to-1. It's as close as you're going to get to owning the original art and holding it in your hands. And Scott Dunbier, thank you, sir, for that and your many other great contributions to the medium. Also the creator of the absolute format, which we are shamelessly seeing if we can improve upon it all, but if not, we'll be happy to settle for. The original art edition will be roughly 12 by 18, and again, Sean Michael Robinson creating these programs that the art was scanned through, and then Jim handling each file by hand, so to speak, digitally. We're very happy with where we're at and what we're seeing from the reproduction. And the original art edition will come. You'll have the option of having a bound in tip in sheet signature plate that'll be unique to the original art edition. And then we have a complete edition, which in the promo copy that I write, I have taken to calling comprehensively exhaustive. And we're doing our best. I mean, we're going to have Steve's correspondence with the printer from back then. Multiple essays from comics figures, essays from paleontologists, obviously all the published Tyrant work, and then there will be work that would have made up Tyrant 5 and 6 will be in there that folks have never seen, and plethora of sketches, and there's the 7,000 word essay that Steve wrote specifically for this. That's the complete edition, and you'll also be able to get that'll be akin again to the DC Absolute format, the oversized hardcovers that are somewhere around 9 by 12, and you'll be able to get the complete edition also with its own unique tip-in signature plate. So there'll be 2 different signature plates, and you'll be able to get the artist edition with it or without it, and you'll be able to get the complete edition with it or without it. But there'll be 2 different signature plates designed by Jim, obviously signed by Steve. There'll be a slipcase edition of the complete edition. There's I can't wait to show it off. I'll send it to you so you have it, but it's like a little too soon to show it off in public. But Jim we weren't even going to do one up until like 2 weeks ago, and then I was just thinking of the totality of the campaign and everything, and we were sort of the mindset of hey, these are going to be expensive books one way or the other, the world we're in right now, right? And then just an artist edition by nature, right? So the books are already expensive, and we don't want to, I know how hard it is out there. I mean, just going to get groceries is kind of, it's crazy, right? So not trying to, as much as we want everything to be deluxe and premium and sure, like not trying to kill people on that kind of stuff, but the very obvious thing popped in my head of, hey, you can still have a slipcase, people don't have to buy it, so got a killer slipcase that I can't wait to show off. There'll be cool features in the books. There's going to be a reversible triptych fold out that'll be black and white on one side and color on the other. There's going to be a lot of good stuff. There's an essay from Jim in the complete edition. Jim sort of has the last word. And I don't think I'm revealing too much. I think it's been talked about in one of the podcasts, whether it's been published or not yet, or gone live. What's the phrase for when you guys put it? Is it called published when it like you do the show and then it goes live? Or
yeah, sure.
Is it called published? Thanks. You're too kind, Taylor. But Steve's dedicating these books to Ed. So I think that's a lovely thing. And if nothing else, I think for Ed's family, I think that'll be a real nice thing. I don't even know if they're aware of that, but Steve's going to wind up, the books are going to be dedicated to Ed. And all this information, there's going to be a ton of promotion and, podcasts and articles, and I update the Comics Lighthouse Instagram account every day, and all the information will come out. I get a lot of messages, and thank God, because if I didn't, we were doing something wrong. But I get a lot of messages asking, "Oh, when are you finally going to say the date?" And I understand, and I am so appreciative that anybody even cares enough to message me to ask. And I believe me, I understand the enthusiasm. It's one of these things where we're trying to deliver the very best campaign and books possible and the best items and stuff possible. And we're also trying to make sure that Steve comes away from this with something that is substantial, because Steve is at the point in his life where a man should be able to think about a comfortable retirement. And this project could go a long way towards that. So I totally understand people asking and saying, "Hey, when are you gonna get the DMs or some public comments? Announce the date. When's the date?" And it's like, yeah, it's going to be in March. It's going to be in March. We wanted to do it in February, and everybody's busy. Jim works for VFriends as a full-time job. I have I'm freelance managing or editing about 16 different comic projects on top of Tyrant and the second Lighthouse project, which is already lined up and maybe we'll hint at later, Taylor. But the second Lighthouse book is already underway and will be announced, probably early summer, midsummer. I'll just see how far along we get with the printer with Tyrant first, But yeah, that's all the news that's fit to print, sort of.
No, it's amazing. There's a lot to chew on there. I think one thing that about Tyrant and Steve Bissette's talent, one thing that I love about him is that how much he talks about how he hates the grid, hates the 9-panel, 6-panel grid on the comic book page. And it's such a funny thing to me. Like, he's one of the first cartoonists I've ever heard say, like, he just flat out hates it. But, like, it also forces him to then have to come up with so many different compositions for his pages. Like, and he never really repeats the same composition. So not only is he an amazing talent as far as, like, just a draftsman, period, but, like, the idea of every page of composition that he comes up with, like, that's the thing that I loved about the Swamp Thing run that he did with Veitch and Toddleben, was just like how open everything was. And then with Tyrant, he did that as well. And the 1941 book, which I absolutely love, that he did with Veitch, like, that's one of my favorite, like, weird comics to look through too. Like, but yeah, so he's just amazing talent. I think the thing that works for Tyrant so well, though, and to kind of pitch it to the audience here, because it in its simplest elevator pitch, you're learning the life story of a dinosaur, and like that. But I feel like that doesn't do justice to how good of a reading experience it is, because not only is it educational, because it, like, Steve Bissette poured so much research into this, and all that back matter, I know you're going to put in the complete edition, all the back matter that's in each issue, that he was showing off his research. Because, like, if you got the single issues of Tyrant, if you're not aware as a viewer, there would be like 21 pages of comic book story, and then behind that would be letters pages, featuring a litany of famous names of the comic book industry praising this work. But then also there'd be pages of all the research that Bissette was doing. Yes. And even like, as the project was going on, like later issues, he'd be like, "Oh, I kind of got this wrong in issue number 1, or this new research came out that maybe I should have changed that." Which I'm sure now, 20-30 years later, like, there's probably even more research that would have nullified some of it, I guess. But
Taylor, there's a whole section. Yeah, each issue has part of that back matter you're talking about. There's a section called Gizzards, and in that section, that's the section you're talking about, where he spells out, "Hey, last issue, I was wrong on that. I just read this new book, and this is the science," right? And the funny thing is, and sorry, I always got to work this in. It's old cat skill. Yeah. This is old Catskill Borscht Belt humor stuff here, where Steve labels it in the thing. It's called, it's gizzards, and then he has in parentheses, because dinosaurs don't have appendixes. Bum. So yeah, we're collecting all the gizzards. There's movie reviews, there's comic reviews. One thing I'm doing, and as a comic lover, I think you might get a kick out of this, is I haven't figured out where we're, like, whether I'm just going to probably just give it away on Instagram. It is what it'll wind up being, but I'm going to put together what I'm calling, like, these Tyrant time capsules. So I'm going to put together 4 boxes, and it's one for each issue of Tyrant that that Steve put out. And in the box, I'm going to gather up all the stuff that I can gather that he talks about in the back matter. So it'll be like Tyrant #1 time capsule, and it'll be the comics that he reviews or talks about in the back
Oh,
matter. Or if I can get my hands on one of the dinosaur books, or I've even gone, I just sent one of these out to somebody. I've even gone and got on the back of Tyrant 1 the ad. Do I have Tyrant 1 sitting here? I don't have it sitting handy. But on the back of Tyrant 1, there was an ad for a dinosaur sculptor named John Fishner, who was very famous in those circles in that era. I tracked John down. He's still alive. He's probably in his 80s, but I got him on the phone in Texas like a couple weeks ago, and I wound up buying as many of his sculptures as I could find. So we're gonna like tie in and try to make the sort of sort of relive the experiences as much as we can, while at the same time presenting editions of the work that I don't think Steve himself would have ever dreamed of, to be honest. Like he said the other day, he certainly never thought in 1994, oh, this will be an artist, this will be this big one day. You know
right.
what I mean? Like it wasn't even a thing. So yeah, it's gonna be, we're trying to put together, really premium items that are worth everybody's hard-earned dollar, and represent the work to its fullest, and also give Jim, one of the great designers in comics, the best canvas he can have. But we also want to have fun with it. So, we're giving away Steve. Where is it? Here, you want to talk about funny shit, Taylor? I get all these boxes from Steve in the last couple of weeks, and one of them is just a tube of Monster Men from Steve Bissette. So it's little, can you see them good enough? Like bubblegum machine shit. You know what I mean? Like little Monster Men. And I mailed the 2 giveaways away last week, and I threw a few of these in and said, by the way, the monsters are directly from Steve Bissette himself, So just having fun with this kind of stuff, as we deal with the some of it gets stressful. So it's good to have some fun with it,
Yeah. Yeah, but also, so what I was going to say is, like, not only is it educational, but also I feel like it kind of reads as just like a monster comic. And like reading it, because I was rereading it before this, it kind of gives me like vibes of like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein at points, when you're going through like the monster, his thoughts and things, like through her actual story, not like the adaptations that came afterwards. And like it kind of reads like that too. So, which I think plays into Bissette's. He just has a love for horror movies, and I think that kind of plays into it as well. But it's so like steeped in actual science as well. It's like this kind of beautiful mashup that I feel like anyone could enjoy. I feel like any science nerd could enjoy it. Any fan of like monster comics can enjoy. I know Jim Rugg is on record saying that he was always constantly trying to present comics of cool art to his art teachers in high school, and they would always reject them. But he said Tyrant was one of the few comics he would show them that they're like, oh, okay, so this is a real piece of art here, which art teachers can. All comic book art's real art, but it was one of those things that was respected by people even outside of comics.
Yeah, no, Jim's talked about that. I heard that story recently, and that's a beautiful thing. It's funny. I don't know about you. I had the same sort of thing where, I would try to validate comics to my teachers. I would show them when Watchmen was one of the first like hardcover collected comics, and tried to show it. I was like, look, and there's so, but no, there's so many. I'll tell you, there's a character in Tyrant, one of the dinosaurs, and it's not in the classic, like if I say the point of view character, I think these days we'll think of like George R.R. Martin, and so it's not akin to like, oh, this is completely dedicated to this dinosaur. But there's the dinosaur egg sucker, if he pops in your head, Taylor. And we got asked a question the other day in one of the podcasts, and I think it was a live one, and somebody asked it, and it was like, it was me, Steve, and Jim, and it was somebody asking like the 3 of us, like, how do you start to tell your stories, or how do you help people guide them to tell stories? And I just chimed in. I said, well, look, everywhere in the world right now, somebody wants something and can't have it. And when someone does something about it, you have a story. You have the start of a story, and you could do a lot worse than looking at like stories that way, right? So for me, the egg sucker, and I didn't even think of this until recently, but the egg sucker is that he wants to survive, and his survival is eating these eggs. and he wants that, and he covets those eggs. He needs those eggs. He's there is an element of not it's not anthropomorphized.
Right.
That's a different thing. And I hesitate here. I'm sort of searching my mind to not say human, but that is sort of what it is. There is a human element to the egg sucker's need and the way Steve depicts it. I also think, and it doesn't get talked about a lot, although like Steve has talked about some of the more concrete influences that Alan Moore had. Steve has told a story of being with Alan and telling him about Tyrant, and they're together in person, and Moore just starts walking around as if he's a dinosaur and saying meat, not meat. And that's in the book. Like he has Tyrant think meat, not meat. You know what I mean? So Moore was an influence in like small ways like that. Like, but then there's a deeper influence there, I think, that doesn't get talked about much, where if you really read it closely, and I'm sure you did, a lot of like, you could tell that Steve spent that close time with Moore and Moore's scripts, like the writing, the cadence, and there's a level of just polish and sophistication to the writing that I think Steve benefited from, from the close relationship with Alan Moore. And you can see it, there's a poetic repetition in the Blood and Berries issue, which is, arguably maybe the finest of like the sort of figurative poetic writing involved. And then there's just great writing all around. He does a masterful job of what we would call the dissemination of information, right? Like just getting across, this is this era, and this is the shit that grew here. You know what I mean? Like how he, particularly in the beginning of the first issue, and then particularly again in the third issue, which is basically all the gestation, right? You're inside the dinosaur egg for almost the whole issue, really. So the writing and everything, Taylor. Yeah, there's sorry if I'm like sort of going off the point you're making.
No, absolutely. No, I think that's what it's not like a Wikipedia information dump on how dinosaurs came about. No. Like there is a true narrative story throughout that is seeped in a lot of that stuff. And if you've read the Swamp Thing run with Alan Moore, like you're saying, like you could definitely see how that influenced the way that Bissette builds this story too. Like those moments of Swamp Thing and how he's going through like reforming himself or building him, like you could see that kind of narrative through like the egg issue that you're talking about. Like it's just a beautiful work. And I know that Steve Bissette has talked about in the past how his ultimate goal was to have this comic be put into museums of like you go to like your local prehistoric museum exhibit and you go to the gift shop and you'd see like Tyrant there in a hardback. I think he said he's gonna do like 6 issues per hardback or whatever was the goal. And I think that's such an awesome idea, like that he was thinking outside of the box really of how to sell this, because I feel like that's such a thing that we think about now today in comics is like, how do we sell this to a certain audience? Because I feel like entertainment alone right now, we're in this period where everything's a niche audience now. Like gone are the days that like the MASH series finale, everyone in America was watching it at once. Now, like everyone has their own little TV show that they're into. So like TV ratings look worse, but it's really just because everyone's watching their own thing. Same thing with comics. Like this might be a huge selling comic. You might find out like, some web comic is the best selling comic of the year. And you're like, I've never even read that, but I love comics. How is that off my radar? So just trying to find like those niche audiences. And I feel like, is that a goal though? Like I know like it was to get into museums. Like, are you trying to procure this and maybe put it into any sort of educational space?
Actively, yes. Right now, my main focus, and the good folks who are helping me with this, our focus is the campaign. But for anybody who's done these kind of things, yes, the campaign, our campaign will be a 30-day campaign, so it'll be full month campaign, and yes, it's a daily thing that requires your attention. But anybody who's done these, you'd be bullshitting yourself if you after the first few days it slows down considerably. and you have a period that's very slow. So part of my work will be to find ways to hopefully mitigate that slowness and you know, bring new awareness and people to the campaign. But during that period, I'll be more actively engaged with this museum plan that we have, and it's sort of one of these things that's sort of get one thing in place and then the next thing. So the museums are they're sort of the next thing. I'm confident we'll be able to get, you know, the artist edition in particular, I think, into you know, a lot of great educational spaces and museums throughout the country. That's a big part of the goal, very big part.
That's awesome. And I just love, because I talk about this on my channel all the time about preserving comic book history, and it's so important to have these things reprinted in different formats for the next generation. Because like a huge mainstream one I think of is like Fantagraphics right now is doing all the Atlas comics for Marvel, because Marvel, for whatever reason, thinks they're not sellable, but obviously Fantagraphics is proving otherwise. But like those are like those are like Marvel comics from the 50s. Like those are, you think of like bigger comics. There's so many other publishers in the 50s that died out, and we'll probably never see those comics again, unfortunately. Yeah. But now they're preserving these, so now the next generation can see them. So then our kids and our grandkids might come across these hardcovers, and then maybe they can preserve it again. Same thing with Tyrant. Like that could have been a comic that just died off, unfortunately. Like 20, 30 years down the road, like people could be like, nobody would know about it. But now that you're preserving it in these different formats, it's going to live on for another generation, and hopefully, you know, somebody in the future will pick it back up and preserve it some more. But and I just love that Steve Bissette's going to be able to see this in his lifetime too, because unfortunately, a lot of these archival projects are for cartoonists that are long gone, where they don't get to see that. And I think one of the coolest parts about the story that you've told today is the fact that the proof of concept for Steve Bissette, you presented this to him multiple times, and he's like, nobody wants to see it. But the proof of concept was once he saw the Kayfabe video and saw the traction that video got, and now he's like, maybe people are interested in this.
That is the origin story. I mean, you know, there's different angles to it, but that's the you know, that's the Aphrodite and the sea foam of this whole thing. It really is I told you the story of pretty close to how it happened earlier. Yeah, like I think 3 different times. I've joked with Steve. I think I said it in a podcast the other day, and I'm only half joking. I said, hey, maybe I'll screenshot the text messages and we'll put those in the complete edition too. You know, but I think it was 3 times over the course of maybe 2 years where I went and said, hey, Steve, how are you? Tyrant. And he said, Chris, how are you? No. And I think that was 3 times. And then he popped up and said, Chris, how are you? Have you seen this Kayfabe video? And he sent me the link, and I hadn't seen it. Right. So I clicked, and I won't lie. I did. I saw it. I said, oh, fuck yeah. You know, like I started to understand it was, you know, I understood that, you know, I already knew that he had a lot of respect for those guys. And then, you know, part of my role in these things is sort of, you know, trying to evaluate an overall situation, and there's a generational component that I understood would be very fulfilling to Steve and comforting, and that was he knew that Ed and Jim were successful independent creators of their age. He knew it. He knew they both had commercial hits, and he knew they were both like well-respected craftsmen, and he knew that they were also, you know, sure, Ed with Fantagraphics and Jim, you know, they both have publishers, but they were independent guys mostly, right? So he knew that, and I knew that would make sense to him in a way that maybe me alone couldn't make sense to him. So yeah, no, listen, that Kayfabe video, and I'll tell you, I've mentioned Kayfabe more in the last few podcasts because it's hit me more. I've started in my work. I've been working with some younger creators. I work with Kurt Piers, and he's in his early 30s. I'm working, you know, with different people who are 35 and under. And that wasn't the case a couple years ago. And in talking to them, I really do understand now better. I mean, Kayfabe was hugely influential to a generation, like I guess the generation under me. Like if you're 35 and under, I've said this, and I think it's true. If you're 35 and under, that is probably the only way you know what the hell Tyrant is, because you know it's never been collected. That's one thing to stress here, and I probably haven't done a good enough job of that in these podcasts, is that it's never been collected, right? So there is no collection of Tyrant out there ever. It just doesn't exist. So you would have never seen it the way that, thank God, the last couple generations have grown up experiencing comics, which is the way, right? Like your background and mine, where there's collections everywhere and every, but so these last two generations, and I think generations move so fast now, Taylor, you know what I mean? I think I know technically by the biblical sense of, the span of a lifetime and the seed of man and all that, maybe it hasn't been two generations, but it's been 2 generations since Tyrant at this point. And, I really, that's the thing. I think there's a couple elements to it. There's the side of it where it's like the people who love this stuff, the people who've been around it, who are maybe in the ballpark of me and Jim's age, and they've loved it as long as we have. There's the element, and those are people who are like the rock foundation of something like this. They're the people who are going to help you have a successful first day of a campaign, and they're the people who are going to pony up the 150 for an artist edition. Like, these are people who care about this stuff, and I want to thrill them, like I want them, when they see the books, to say, oh shit, like I collect artist editions, but this one's really fucking nice, That's the goal with that. But the thing that I think probably excites me even more, if I'm being honest, is the fact that there will be 2 generations who've never seen this book, and they're going to read it, and they're going to read it through the eyes, in a sense, of Jim Rugg, because it's Jim and I presenting it, to people. And with the complete edition, it's not going to just be, presenting the 80 pages in a row, and then here's all the back matter. We're sort of going to recontextualize things and present everything in order, but sort of, a little bit differently than the actual issues did, so I'm very excited that from ages, 15 to 35 to 40, like that's a big gulf of ages where I think people are going to be seeing this for the first time. And I'm pretty confident. We got a lot of work to do, and some of it's hard, some of it's easy, but I'm pretty confident the books are going to be spectacular in terms of when they're in your hand and, when you're flipping through them. So just super excited about that part, the new generations coming into it. The folks who revere Daniel Warren Johnson and get turned on by that sort of, vibrancy, right? The way he goes at a page. I mean, that's what Tyrant is in its own way. It's somebody's hand flying around who needs to tell the story. So yeah, just super excited for new generations to see it, and to give the people who've stood behind it all these years, to give them, the definitive edition.
Yeah. And you've touched on it, but I'd be remiss if I didn't myself. Jim Rugg, his book design is impeccable. Like, he could just do a career of just book design, and he would be my favorite book designer in comics. I love his comics and his artwork and stuff, so I'm glad that he's still doing that. But his book design, like, you look at it, is like every book he's done, he's designed himself. All of his Street Angel books, which I've done a video on, the big hardcovers that he's done, they're beautiful. They all have like their own unique kind of characteristic. The Hulk Grain Design book that he did, the Treasury edition of that, is beautiful. I don't own the Nemo book, unfortunately.
I don't have one either. How funny is that?
That's weird.
I live in Tucson for like almost 6 years now, or even 7 years, I guess. And I have a storage space in New Jersey still, and I don't have any of the books I've made here except like the newer. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like stuff. Here might be my favorite Jim book.
Yes.
Yeah, this might be my favorite Jim book of recent times. He sent me this. I was late to this one. And he said, hey, have you seen my 1986 thing? And I said, no. And he sent me this. And man, this thing should have won. Awards are what they are. And for the most part, nobody should fixate on awards. You know what I mean? But man, this should have won the Eisner for whatever the hell the category, archival project or next journalist, whatever it would have been. Whatever won the Eisner in this thing's category did not deserve to beat this thing. This is a wild comic document, man. It really is. For any of your audience, because this seems like the thing your audience would probably be into. For anybody
I've shown that off on a video. I have a video which I'll link below. It's called like Jim Rugg's Zines and Comics.
perfect.
And it has that, and it has his black and white zine. I think Super Mag is part of it. That video.
Oh,
Super Mag. That's an awesome one too. He should have won an Eisner for that one. I know he's on record saying he poured his heart and soul into the lettering of that. And he's like, I was trying to win the Eisner for lettering on that book, and he should have, in my opinion. I think his lettering is amazing as well. So I can't wait to see the overall package of these books. I know they're going to be like when this project was announced, I was first like, awesome. I can't wait. I'm glad that Tyrant's finally been collected. But then when Jim's name was attached to it, I'm like, that's so perfect. Like there's not a person in comics more geared towards designing this book than Jim Rugg. Not only because he loves Tyrant, but because of how good his book design is.
I couldn't agree with you more, Taylor. Yeah, no, it's I say this, and sometimes it sounds like a flourish or whatever, but no, this was only ever really going to be me and Jim, you know. If I had to, if for some reason Jim was just like, I can't do it, you know, yeah, I would have soldiered forth. And there's, you know, I know some people who I would enjoy working with, but it never would be the same. I was telling Jim yesterday, you know, just how instrumental he is and how blessed I am to be able to launch this effort with Jim by my side. You know, I'm well aware of it, and you know, I make no bones about it. You know, like I've done some books in the past, but I've had a weird career, you know, and I've had whole years where, like I said, I was sort of out there howling at the moon and didn't produce, and a lot of the stuff that I have produced these last 5 years hasn't come out yet. So I've had a weird career where like nobody knows who the hell I am, and you're launching a new company at a time when new companies fall out of the trees. And let's be honest, most of them are bullshit. Most of them are flash in the pan, or they announce some huge agenda and they put out one book and they're, you know what I mean? Like that's the environment. So you know, having Jim with me, not just from the obvious creative strength of it, like you said, one of the great designers, you know, in modern comics, but from the standpoint of you know, I mean, how lucky are you? Like he's very well established in the world that we're talking in here, right? So it's like, it's one thing for Chris Stevens from Lighthouse that nobody's ever heard of to reach out to you guys. You guys are all busy. You guys have other people reaching out to you. You guys have your topics that you want to cover, right? It's one thing for me to reach out and say, hey, can you take some time out? And hey, I need to do it this month, by the way. You know, it's a whole other thing if I reach out and say, hey, you know, Jim Rugg is part of my, you know what I mean? So it's a beautiful thing to have Jim with me. I think me, him, and Steve are all just, you know, me and Jim are doing this strictly out of love, you know. Yeah, there'll be some money made for everybody because we're going to be, you know, it's going to be a successful campaign, but we're doing it strictly out of love. And you know, we're talking about Jim, and I'll just throw it out there that the second Lighthouse book is already, you know, underway, and Jim will return in the same role.
Can you tell us what that book is?
I could say that it'll be me and Jim and Paul Pope. So it'll be a Paul Pope book, but I can't say the title just yet. I'm not trying to be clever or seductive, but it's just a little too early. But we have started mentioning that, yeah, it is going to be a Lighthouse. The second Lighthouse book will get announced this summer. I'm hoping early summer. Just depends. I don't want to announce it until we're pretty close to having the time books in people's hands, you know? So once we're close to having the books in people's hands, we'll announce. And we'll probably do a similar thing of about a 3 to 4 month build up, maybe, you know, probably slightly less, to be honest, because Lighthouse won't be a brand new thing, right? So it'll a little bit of a sort of compact the runway, so to speak. So, but yeah, it'll be Jim will come back as designer and all. I can say this, that when I said, hey Jim, I know it's been a long road getting Tyrant to this point, and we've had, you know, a lot of because people have to understand too, and I don't want to make this into a maudlin thing, and it's a very serious thing, but Steve's son died during the course of us getting Tyrant ready. Steve's son died a little less than 2 years ago now. So, and he died from brain cancer. And there was a period when Steve said yes, and then it was his son Michael got brain cancer. And it was very dark, but then there was a period of he was receiving experimental treatment in Boston. And it was, I believe he was one of 12 people in the world getting this experimental treatment. And they had very high hopes for they had very high hopes for a month or two, and just it didn't work out, and sadly Michael passed away, and we've that's something Steve's had to deal with during the course of this all. But to get to this point now, you might have to edit this because I just started thinking about Michael and I just totally spaced on my thought. I apologize, Taylor.
No, you're talking about your next project with Paul Pope and Jim.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. But yeah, so I was saying that I called Jim and I had, to tell you the truth, I'd signed the contract with Paul. And I hadn't even really told Jim. I had mentioned like, hey man, would this be interesting to you? And he's like, let's focus on, let's get Tyrant going, right? And I said, no, I understand. But I wound up moving things forward with Paul. I signed a contract and I texted Jim. I said, you're around. And I called him. I said, hey, I know we got to, I know Tyrant's been, and we've had these tragedies. And I said, but Jim, do you want to do X with me? And he's like, oh, Chris, fuck yeah. And Jim doesn't curse. Right. Right. So it's that kind of book. It meant as much. It's a book that actually, and no one would hate me for saying this, I know Steve would understand. It's a book that, to tell you the truth, means more to me personally. Just meaning that, it's a book that it's a different genre, and it's a book that just spoke to me at a time in my life when I needed to hear that particular voice. And Jim feels the same way about it. And it's another one of these books that I don't think, even though Paul is who he is, I don't think most people have read it. And I think that it's, the editions that exist of it, so there'll be some new work and we'll announce all that stuff. And in some ways it's, it's a little too soon for it to consume me, but it's kind of starting to grow in my thoughts, No,
it's awesome. I think today's day and age is we have the ability for kind of these boutique publishers to exist where you only put out a project every few months or whatever, and it's not, and it can sustain itself as a publisher doing that. So I think it's awesome. I think Living the Line is kind of operates that same kind of way with Sean Michael Robinson, and they're kind of like this boutique publisher that it's like these projects that Sean is like really passionate about, that he kind of picks up and does the design work on. And like you talked about, his reproduction's beautiful. So I was glad to see his name attached to Tyrant as well.
Sean's one of the bright lights in comics. I mean, he does great stuff. And I guess now he's doing a lot of stuff with Brandon Graham. So I think that's a good, that's a good combo, like, very smart, guys who are just steeped in comics. There's not many people, and this is going to sound a little arrogant, but there aren't many people that I ever get in conversations with about comics where I feel like, fuck, maybe I don't know as much as I thought I did, Sean might be one of those people. They're few and far between, and he might be one of them. He certainly knows way more than I do about printing and the history of printing and that kind of stuff. And again, his book, I have it sitting here, but this book here, man, another book that this book again.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to harp on awards because in general, I don't think about them. Yeah, I have one here as a prop because we're doing promotion, right? But this book should have won the Eisner in its category. This book is it's a flawed work of genius. This book sort of falls apart. This is, for your audience, The Strange Death of Alex Raymond. It sort of does fall apart if we're being real. But man, it's a work of genius still, and the fact that it didn't win the Eisner is like, wow, that one. Sean loves me, I think, for saying that. I banged that drum harder than he ever could, Like,
that was the book that launched Living the Line. Was that book?
Was that their first book? See,
that was the first one.
Okay, I mean, what a book it is. It falls apart. Have you read the whole thing?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you because it starts off as like this, like you feel like you're reading this masterpiece story and comic, and all of Dave Sim and then Carson Grubau's artwork is just like it's telling this great story, but yet it does fall apart, but it's definitely worth reading. It's definitely worth picking up.
It's a work of look, a genius can be flawed, genius doesn't have to mean perfected. It's not perfected. It falls apart. Something happens it just goes off the rails. If you're being generous, there's no way to say it doesn't. But man, what a work of genius. And genius is rare in any field, especially, in any field. Genius is rare anywhere. So yeah, but no, Sean is great. I don't get a chance to, I want to start mentioning Sean more and more because he's been he makes Jim feel confident. So imagine, you know what I mean? That's the level
Mhm.
of expertise that Sean brings. So yeah, we're just again lucky, very lucky.
I've talked to Sean a few times, and I was even on a near mint condition, the channel you were on with Jim
Yeah,
and
great
Steven.
guy,
I
Omar.
was on a show with Sean last fall where we're talking about horror comics. So I need to get Sean on a episode and interview him anyways. But so I've talked to him before, and he's a great guy.
I'll shoot you if you want. Or I guess you can nowadays. You just DM anybody, right? But if you want the email, I'll shoot you his email afterwards.
Oh yeah, we him and I have DM back and forth. He sent me out like review copies of some of the Living the Line books, so we're in
Nice.
contact. I just need to ask him, like, come on the show, and I know he would.
You would have a great talk with him, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe in preparation for the campaign, I'll try to get him on.
No, that would be.
So you said you're launching in March. We don't have an official date yet.
In March.
But if you're wanting to know the official date as viewers, as we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes, the notification, the sign up for notification is the link is down below in the description. You can go there. It's a quick little, like, you hit a bookmark button and it sends an email to you whenever the campaign launches. Also follow Lighthouse on Instagram, which I'll have the information down below. But what is your handle? Is it just
Lighthouse at Instagram and then Facebook as well. And I always say, if anybody's got questions or thoughts or anything like that, they're, feel free to DM me either through there, or if you find me, my personal account, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Feel free to DM me.
Yeah, definitely. So all the information will be down below. You don't want to miss out on this project. It's something I'm super stoked about. I'm going to be talking about it on my channel quite a bit throughout the campaign, I'm sure, trying to hype it up. But thank you, Chris. Is there any last thoughts or anything else you want to get in before we get out of here?
No, Taylor, I just appreciate you taking the time this morning. I hope you're okay with the snow. I'm super excited. It's been, real for you and the folks who do the great work you do in your field of the comics farm, so to speak, letting us come and spread the Tyrant gospel. So the Steve Bissette Tyrant campaign will go live in sometime in March, probably right around the middle of March. Everything will be updated at the Comics Lighthouse accounts on Instagram and Facebook. And we'll be giving away a lot of like signed Steve stuff over the next few weeks. I'm going to give away little statues like this guy I showed earlier. So we'll have some fun as we build up to the opening. And no, Taylor, just thank you again for letting me come on and talk about this stuff with you. It was a real treat.
Definitely. So yes, everybody look forward to Tyrant. Thank you so much. And then just remember to keep talking comics.